that we are faced with as a country. The lots of positives, but there are outside threats as well. Our major trading partner, China, not having had the best of times in terms of their economic growth, lots of challenges there that stem from their property sector. So there are many myriad of issues that we have to face. Perhaps, Ruben, you can just give a general comment before we head over to Parliament. People are seated, ready for the Minister. I think that we'll be heading there quite soon. But just given the overview that I've given, and not necessarily with your taxman hat on, what are your views?
Yes, I think we want to see a budget that does what's been promised, and that is broadening the tax base, growing the economy. You want to see us, and then also see us following through with that. So if you listen to the State of the Nation address, the President has said lots of positive things. You want to see that flow through. So talk about investment in infrastructure and that sort of thing. At this stage, we're spending 60% of our budget on the wage bill and a significant amount on debt service costs. You want to see that starting to turn around, more investment in infrastructure. At this stage, we're spending 15% of our GDP on infrastructure spend, which is behind the National Development Plan of 30%. And so you want to see us get onto the front foot in that area and really implement also what is then said this afternoon in the speech.
All right. We are going to hand over now to the Dome where... Okay, no, we're going to continue, pardon me. Okay, Aluwani, I was just looking at the visuals and thought that the Minister was just about to begin speaking there. But just to some of the points that I was raising, you know, about the bigger picture, the elephants in the room, your thoughts?
I think there is a lot of consideration for, like, for instance, ECOM. And for me, I see those as, you know, partnerships that have been set up in terms of dealing with a crisis. But I think from a business side, we still continue to see where there are a lot of inefficiencies that actually hinder investment that you have. And if you can address those quickly, as soon as they come up, then you can be able to move much more faster. I can give you two as an example. Today, most of the oil products come into South Africa via, you know, a precinct called Island View in Durban. And most of us sit there with leases that are expiring in August next year. And we are sitting there and asking, when are these leases actually going to be renewed? And it's a broader conversation that we are having, and it's a policy conversation that we are having, but you cannot have that certainty. So then it begs the question, do I then invest in rebuilding a tank or building a new tank to store the products or not, while I wait for the lease? And those are easy kind of questions that we can tick off and then be able to say there's long-term stability in knowing that the lease is there, and then we can be able to move forward. If I had to move on the tax front, for instance, we now have a tax system, maybe in terms of customs and other areas, where sometimes it's not fit for purpose. It was designed during a time, and we've really moved, and the world has really shifted and changed, but it doesn't serve us anymore. And then it creates these situations where you almost spend a lot of time doing business by engaging with the tax authority and talking about exemptions and other things. I mean, in the past year, we've seen a number of exemptions that the tax commissioner has had to provide to the industry for us to be able to use the pipeline to bring jet fuel from Durban to OR Tambo. Again, you cannot operate by exception and exemptions, so to speak. It tells you have a problem, and you actually have to find a practical way of addressing those problems. So I find there are a lot of areas where we can definitely be able to resolve the easy, simple problems that we see and change and be able to move on, and then that will be able to bring in the investments. Whereas the other areas are more where it's clear it's a national crisis, we need to deal with this and we need to be able to address this. But there are a lot of other bottlenecks that we experience as business.
Aluwani is touching on a lot of very interesting points that speak to your beat. Overhauling the tax system. I mean, not that long ago we had the Davis Tax Commission, and obviously there were some changes that came out of that. How often should a tax system be looked at, you know, to make it fit for purpose for any given economy?
Yeah, so you're right, Nompumelelo. And before the Davis Commission, we of course had the CATS Commission. And I think this year, again, in the budget speech, we'll hear as part of the reviews, and in fact, we hear annually about the reviews that are being undertaken in looking at the tax system, changes that are made, not always that big. I think a big focus of SARS, as we've said, in the recent past has been how they can digitize and make that digital transformation with the use of artificial intelligence, as we said. That seems to have been a big focus area SARS. We also understand that they are looking at the tax policy, for instance, on how you tax alcoholic beverages, with the aim at, again, looking at the illicit market and there being a view that there's possibly losing out on taxes on that front. And so it is something that needs to be continuously looked at. If you look at how you tax cryptocurrency and all these new things that come about, it is something that needs to be continuously looked at to ensure that tax isn't being lost out on.
Tell us about cryptocurrency, because I understand that SARS has joined forces with other SARS around the world, another 40 countries or something, looking precisely at the issue of cryptocurrency to ensure that there's an exchange of information whereby they know who's investing in cryptocurrency where, because usually in the past it's been done in the dark on secret channels, but now they'll know that you've got, 10 million rand invested in crypto somewhere. Just tell us about that, and to the extent to which people need to be aware of that when they do go into the realm of crypto trading, they need to be aware.
Yeah, so I think the overall point there is that there is nowhere to hide, and you're quite right. So SARS, in concert with other tax authorities, are continuously looking at ways of exchanging information, in some cases automatically exchanging that information. That is becoming a big focus area globally. More locally or domestically, another issue that SARS is looking at, and that we may see also tax proposals for in today's budget speech, is how collective investment schemes are taxed in South Africa. And there's been some talk around whether those gains should instead be taxed on a revenue account rather than on capital account. So we wait to see what happens there, but certainly you're correct. Cryptocurrency and exchange of information is a moving and complex area, but certainly there is greater coordination between tax authorities, not only in relation to crypto, but offshore investments, the creating of companies offshore, all of that. Globally, there is an initiative to look at how those sort of unwanted activities is prevented.
So we're in conversation, we continue, it's 6 minutes past 2 o'clock. This is quite unusual that we are 6 minutes past the hour and the minister has not taken to the podium. My understanding is that he's not physically even in the dome, nor is the president. So these are interesting times. We did learn from a publication over an hour ago that there had been an urgent meeting that was convened between the cabinet and the president around some issues around the tax issues that had come out of the budget. The interesting thing is that we have colleagues and economists who are sitting in what are called lockups around the country, here in Cape Town, in Pretoria and wherever else, where they're looking through with a fine-tooth comb, looking through the budget documents which will have been constructed over a number of months with a lot of inputs. And now at the 11th hour of the minister having to deliver his speech, it looks as though there's a little bit of a hiccup, and the key players that we would expect to be in situ are not there. And we continue our conversation as we basically speculate as to what will come out of the budget speech. But this is very unusual indeed. Everybody is watching this. Market players are watching this. Regular South Africans are watching this. They want to know how their bottom line is going to be affected by this speech. And we don't see the important man of the day there in the podium. We see MPs fanning themselves because it's hot here in Cape Town, waiting. Yes, it's a very, very interesting situation. Aluwani, we live in very interesting times at the moment. How important is it for South Africans' interests to trump politics?
Well, interesting times, I would say, it's always interesting. I'll use that word again. It's always very interesting because at every moment, you can always feel like it's interesting times. If you go back to 1994, it was an interesting time. 2000, interesting time. So even this moment for us is our moment to think through, what is going to be the next 10 years, the next 20 years, as it were. And as a South African, I think we often talk about being in a moment where you're thinking, is the promise of this new democratic equal society that we all aspire to actually, going to materialize, or we are in the moment of infliction where that doesn't materialize at all. And we always look at it with the hope that, that materializes as a South African, that we can all be able to go past where we are today and rise above the challenge, and still be able to build a united country that is prosperous on the other side. And so as you look at a budget speech that we are having today, for instance, you're looking at a budget speech where previously, the other minister used to give a budget surplus. Now today is crunch time, and we're thinking, how are we really going to be able to knit it together and be able to have enough to be able to cover the different areas? That just tells you how tight things are at the moment. But I think we have to be in a place where we take bold moves that say, it's tough today, and the way to can be able to actually move forward is that you actually have to increase the tax base. And so you have to take that move that says, perhaps you have to forego some of the expenditure that you need to do today, and then be able to build for the future, so that tomorrow you're not in as tough a situation as we are today. You can think of it as a moment where we are having to go through debt review as a country.
Yes,
yeah.
Indeed. Ruben, I wanted to ask you a question. Just around the controversy that has come up since we are now 10 minutes in, where we would have expected to continue listening to the minister. So a publication came out with a report to say that there had been some angst between the DA and the ANC around a tax increase that has been put in the budget papers. And that the DA had threatened that it would not support this tax increase move. Now, this could be part of the reason why we're seeing the delay in proceedings. Now, as I said, we've got colleagues and economists and other role players busy going through these documents as we speak. They can't leave the lockup room until the minister starts speaking, right? So, but no doubt in those documents, the policy proposals are already there. So, from a practical point of view, if the DA or anybody else within the GNU decides they're not going to support whatever tax proposals there are, what happens from here on out? Even after the minister has delivered his speech, what is the process thereafter? Because just because he says it's a tax proposal, it's not a fait accompli, is it? It's not set in stone. It still needs to be voted on, right?
100% correct, Nompumelelo. So, and it will depend on what the tax proposal is. So certain tax proposals can be passed through, others will require parliamentary approval, and will need to be enacted in legislation before it then becomes law. And so it will depend on what the exact proposal is that is if there isn't such a proposal that is a sticking point. It will depend what that proposal is, and that will drive what the processes are to then enact it for it to become law. In the absence of a proposal becoming law, you'll of course have your existing laws that will continue to apply. As for the budget itself, I understand that in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, and I believe it's Section 29 of that Act, where the budget itself is not approved, it does cater for an interim measure for the first 4 months for 45% of the budget that's been allocated to be spent, so that while this impasse, if there is in fact such an impasse, is resolved, that you can of course continue operating and spending where spend is required. Spending is required, but ultimately, of course, it doesn't bode well if there is such an impasse for the government of national unity, and you would hope that any such impasse will be resolved.
Yeah. Aluwane, I want to tap onto you in terms of you being a business person, aspiring to do well in the sector that you're in and so on. But part of business confidence comes from, what's happening in the political realm. And I suppose this is an example of difficulties. We're now in a new era where we have a government of national unity, where we have players in this new family that are diametrically opposed in many ways when it comes to policy. It is ironic, I think, that you'd have a situation where it's the DA who are opposing tax increases as opposed to the ANC because of their various leanings. But that aside, What does this do for your confidence levels about how we're going to continue progressing as a country? Because we do live in different times. I mean, the last year's election told us that South Africans are not satisfied with what they experienced for the past 30 years. They want something new, but this something new obviously comes with a lot of teething issues.
Well, I think the one thing that I take for South Africa is that it's a very resilient democracy. And that's what we have seen over the number of years. Because the fact that we were even talking about a GNU, if you had asked me pre-election last year and you said we will end up with a GNU, I would have told you no ways. You know, there's no way that they will have an ANC and a DA kind of government. You would have thought other iterations of the GNU could come through, but you have an ANC, DA kind of iteration of a government. That tells you again that, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we will not predict that will actually come true. But that also talks to the maturity of the democracy in the country that we have. That, you know, two parties that look very, you know, very opposed to each other can actually find each other and form a government. And it also tells me that, you know, we are always going to have these debates. And they're always going to be tough. And they're always going to be difficult. But what I find as resilience in South Africa is that we always find a way to find a path forward, even when it doesn't look like we'll be able to find a path forward at all. So even then, when you think about it from a business point of view, you have to be alarmed at a moment, but then still say, I know there will be a way. There will be a path that will still be able to operate.
Yeah, stay positive, stay optimistic.